Hello, stampers and fellow paper crafters. It's Cindy Lynn with my Inkie Fingers. Thank you so much for visiting me today on my YouTube channel and blog for episode 6 of Let's Case It, Let's Make It. This is a series where I take a card, I will post it right up here, that I have found in one of our catalogs as inspiration to case, because so many people like to copy a card that they've seen, but I'm going to show you in this series how to put your own twist on it. So for today, I'm going to use the flourishing phrases, which I used in the baby wipe technique video. So I will link that up here. If you haven't seen that, you may want to try the baby wipe technique when you follow along here. Or you can follow along with the ink blending that we're going to do today. So I'm going to pull out the one flower out of the flourishing phrases and the leaf. And I have the coordinating dies, so I'm going to pull out that big die right there, and we're going to piece that, or not piece it, I guess. We're going to cut it apart later, and we're going to make some nice little background. So I'm also going to use the stitched rectangle dies, and I'm going to use those to cut out a blended background, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to use my paper pumpkin block because it's perfect for so many stamps. And I'm also going to use some foam daubers. Now, nice thing about foam daubers is they'll dry and you can kind of just sort of match your colors. I pulled out the Petal Pink, Calypso Coral, Poppy Parade. Later I'm going to bring out the Melon Mambo, but for the leaves we're going to use the Pear Pizzazz and the Mossy Meadow. The subtle embossing folder, I thought that this just added a nice texture, and I believe the cased card had it too. Now, I did pull out this thread from the Magnolia Lane pack, and I didn't end up using it, but you're more than welcome to. So I've got two Whisper White A2 size, I was going to say mats, but those are just scrap cardstock. And I've got two A2 size cards. One is in Petal Pink and one is in Crumb Cake, because I wanted to show you what the mat for the Calypso Coral looked like on both. And at the end of the video, you will see both, so you guys can decide which one you like better. So now I'm going to pull out the foam daubers and the Petal Pink, Calypso Coral, and Poppy Parade. Now I've laid my inks out darkest to lightest from left to right, and I'm using the Petal Pink right now. And what I'm going to do is take the foam dauber and cover the entire stamp with the Petal Pink, and then I'm going to pick up the Calypso Coral, and I want to do the second layer of, well, I guess it would be the inside flower. If you can picture that inside flower, I want the Calypso Coral to cover that inside flower, kind of overlapping a little bit onto the outer petals of that stamp. And then the Poppy Parade, I'm going to use in the center. And then I'm going to work my way backwards again with the Calypso Coral blending into that center, and then the Petal Pink just blending out that Calypso Coral. So you'll start on the outside, work your way in, and then from the inside, work your way back out. Being careful not to have any harsh dauber circles on your actual stamp. And then I huffed on it. And when I huff on it, it kind of reactivates the ink, so it makes it warm, so I get a really, really good impression. So if you can picture that inside flower there, that's the one, my hand's in the way right there, that I've stamped and it looks darker. So that's the one we're going to focus on right now. And we're going to do the exact same thing, starting with the Calypso Coral. We're going to just kind of lay our ink down on that inside flower, and then we're going to pick up the Poppy Parade, and we're going to daub that on the inside, going again into the Calypso Coral, and then blending out that Poppy Parade. And again, lift your stamp up and kind of tilt it and make sure that you don't have any dauber impressions, the little circle that it'll make on your stamp. And if you do, just pick up some more ink and very lightly daub off that impression. It's not too difficult to do. So I'm going to huff on it again. And I wasn't too careful and worried about the outer petals outside that inside flower, because we're going to fussy cut that out. So you'll see here, there is some, of the other petals, but I'm going to focus on the inside one. So for the leaves, it was super, super simple. I started with Mossy Meadow down at the bottom and along the stem, and then I picked up the Pear Pizzazz, and I worked from the top of the leaf down into the Mossy Meadow. And then this one, I just started with the Pear Pizzazz and then worked up from the Mossy Meadow into the Pear Pizzazz, and then I blended it out with the Pear Pizzazz again. So I'm going to do this one 3 times so that you guys can see how easy that is. starting with the pear pizzazz, using some mossy meadow, and then I'm going to blend that mossy meadow out with the pear pizzazz again. So I really like the shading that gives. So I'm going to cut off all 5 of these images out so that I can fussy cut them. And the outside flower, I'm going to fussy cut it, leaving a nice amount of white, conducive to the amount of white that's going to be left when you cut your little flower. So the little flower, you're just going to cut along that white line. So keep that in mind when you're cutting your larger flower, because you want about the same amount of white around the edges. Now the leaves were super easy to cut out, and I left a little extra at the bottom of the stem of the leaves. I didn't cut the very bottom of the stem because I wanted a little bit extra length there for gluing so I could tuck and nest those behind all of the flowers. So now I've got my scrap piece of Whisper White, and we're going to do some blending. We're going to use the Petal Pink Calypso Coral Poppy Parade, and I brought in the Melon Mambo because I found that there wasn't too much of a gradient difference between Calypso Coral and Poppy Parade. So again, these are darkest to lightest from left to right, and this is where the stitched rectangle dies are going to come in, and I'm going to pick the one that I'm going to use there. And you can use any size you want. If you want it smaller or bigger, just lay that stitched rectangle die down on your actual card and just get an idea for how big it's going to be or how small, and go with the size that works best for you. So starting with the the Petal Pink, I'm going to just blend that in, and I want it a little lighter at the top and then darker down towards the bottom of that color, because that's where it's going to blend into the Calypso Coral. So I'm going to start with the Calypso Coral at the bottom, blending it up. Now, when it comes to blending, the harder you push, the more color you're going to transfer, and the lighter that you apply the dauber, the lighter the color. So water-based inks are not quite the same as a lot of the other inks out there for blending, but with time and practice, you can get an absolutely beautiful effect. And don't forget, when you're blending with these water-based inks, they dry back a lot different than they look when they're wet. So if you're feeling like it's not looking right, let it dry and then go back to it and see what it looks like. So as you can see here, I did put down the Poppy Parade, and I wasn't happy with the gradient. There was not enough gradient change in the color. So I picked up that Melon Mambo, and I really, really liked the way that gave a nice pop in the color, and you could really see the difference there. So I'm going to just go in with all of my different colors now where they meet each other and just blend those out, run that through my Big Shot. Now I did do 2 cards, so this is where you're going to see both. But I picked up my water spritzer bottle, and I'm just kind of tapping some water droplets down with the actual spray mechanism inside the bottle. I used to do it with putting water in my hands and then dropping it, but I found that I would get super big blobs and then little blobs, and that's okay on a big area, but for a smaller area, I wanted all of my water droplets to kind of be in unison with one another and in the same sizes. So now I've got my shimmer spray, and I will link my video for my shimmer spray right here, right now, so that you can see how I mix that. And I put my shimmer spray on there, and then I embossed the matte, the Petal Pink. There you go, Cindy Lynn. Let the clutch out. The Petal Pink matte. Now, I've also pulled out my die, and I've got my second piece of Whisper White cardstock, and I've got my stamp, and that one's out of the Flourishing Phrases, and I've got the Calypso Coral and the Mossy Meadow markers. And I'm going to color the thank you with the Mossy Meadow, and then the So Very Much with the Calypso Coral. And you can huff on those as well before you stamp it down, but I've got those stamped, and then I've got another stitched rectangle die, and I figured I would stamp it and put the die on there and then run both dies through at the same time just to kind of save time. So there they are now. And I've got all my images cut out, and there's my background. So I'm going to show you the Petal Pink on Petal Pink card. And I'm going to show you kind of how I trim up the actual die that I cut. And I'm going to lay everything out, and then I'm going to put it to the side and build my second card. So you can see here where I'm trimming that right above the leaf, and I'm just kind of trimming it along the shape of the leaf, because you won't see where I trimmed it on the piece I've already put to the side because that'll be hidden. And then I trimmed it again at the bottom there because that piece I want to use at the top of the card. So I didn't have the die in the actual cased card. So this is where if we don't have the supply, we got to use what we have and make it work, right? And frankly, I really like the way that this one turned out. So I'm pretty pleased with it. So if you're not making two cards and you've laid everything down and you've pieced it all there and you're thinking, okay, now I've got to glue it all, you can take a photo of it with your camera phone or smartphone, I guess they call them nowadays. And you can look at the photo on your phone while you piece it together. But because I'm making two, I can look at the one that I've pieced there and I can place all of the pieces on the other card. And you can see the mat. I didn't center it in the card. I kind of put it a little bit over to the right. Did I say all of my ink pads were left to right? I hope I did because I just looked at my right hand and thought, did I say everything was right to left or left to right? I'll have to look at that when I edit, I suppose. So anyhow, I've got all of my glue putting down on my leaves there, and I'm going to lay all my leaves kind of where I see them on the card that I've already laid everything down on. I am going to use dimensionals on the flowers. Now, when you do the little flower, kind of keep in mind when you put your dimensionals on it, where they're going, because you don't want the dimensional to overlap on the flower you've already got down there. The little flower can just kind of rest on the top of the other flower and save yourself the effort of double dimensioning or putting two dimensionals or whatnot, right? So I put a fair amount of dimensionals on the sentiment because I don't want it to sag or crease in the mail. And I'm just going to lay that up at the top corner of the blended little mat that we did. And I'm going to pull out my frosted clear epoxy droplets, my pearl basic jewels, and my adhesive back sequins. And I did at the end, after I finished filming, pull out my Wink Stella, and I colored the little white circles of all of that stencil we cut out and the flowers. I thought it was super, super pretty. And while I was looking at this here, I was like, oh, let's curl up all our flowers and curl up the leaves. It looks pretty for pictures. Of course, they're going to flatten out, right, when we mail them. But there you have it. There's your case card for today. I get the feeling you guys are really enjoying these series, so I'm really happy about that. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And until I see you again, take care and happy stamping.